First of all, we're a cord blood bank, a private cord blood bank in Brazil. And I think two important disclaimers. When Terrapin invited us to be here to talk, it took me a while to put these slides together. And I was thinking what to talk. And in reality, this is a lot of, not that we went through some kind of a doctoral dissertation or any kind of course by which we learned what biobanking is. This talk has a lot more to do of how we overcame enormous business threats, business challenges and difficulties, and got to the point where we are today, and mostly transformed adversity into opportunity. And the second disclaimer would be, in a capital deprived country such as Brazil for this industry, so what we were able to do to date has basically been with angel money. That's it. No round of funding whatsoever. So it's difficult because it's growing, it's innovating, it's diversifying with cash flow. And the other important thing in terms of depriving when you talk about Brazil is innovation. The scientific production, and I relate to Greg's world map by which South America has 11 clinical trials. It's nothing. So we have to grow, we have to innovate, and we don't have technology to access. So we have to find ways to collaborate. So that's a few key disclaimers to start with. First of all, and this is a similar slide from last year's talk, in the cell therapy arena, I think cord blood banks deserve a lot of respect, frankly. We were pioneers in having to learn how to sell something complicated, something mostly unknown for OBGYNs. We've been working or swimming against a current of sensationalism and having to be shepherding quality information all along and denying many false statements and providing quality information. The other thing is that OBGYNs initially don't really care. Leukemia is a hematologist problem, so grasping their attention has always been something of a challenge for us because it's basically out of their scope of care. And here's a really, really important thing against us, which is hematologists and oncologists in general are against what we do. And that's very prevalent in many countries, in Brazil in particular. And the last thing, and foremost, I think we had to maintain lots of financial staying power all along, and it's really not easy. To start with, talking about cord banks and how we evolved to biobanks, I think the first thing is the famous concept of from bench to profits. Which is how to make this process sustainable, and it's via product, it's via distribution, and it's a very difficult, a very challenging endeavor. It's not simple because there's a human being in the middle, and there are many human beings actually. You're talking about a complex people and organizational challenge, a business challenge that is really not trivial, and without this, the product simply will not get there. And it's making this whole equation viable is, again, not trivial at all. And this is a very, very polluted slide, and it's intended to be that way because this is what a cord blood rep faces today. This should be a doctor that has at least 2, 3 jobs, 4 jobs. He has to read all kinds of different papers from his profession, from cross professions and scientists poking into his profession. And then mommy comes in and makes all these intelligent questions and out of the context questions. And then look at what happens. All the drug reps from all over the place and from cord blood banks. This is just a sort of what an OBGYN in Brazil goes through. We estimate roughly between 80 and 100 different people hitting on OBGYNs. And there's a famous story, I don't know if it's true, that Roche or Bayer put a rep 9 o'clock in the morning to sell a product, and he had his 2-minute pitch, and he walked out, waited for like 2 hours, and walked back in and pitched the exact same thing. And the doctor greeted him with a smile and thank you and please come back, I'm interested, and he didn't have a clue what he was talking about. So it's very difficult when you look at the doctor as a business channel to really grasp his attention, especially when it's outside of his scope of care and when he may not care that much. The other thing that I'd like to share with you from our experience is what we call in business commercial cycle, it takes forever for a rep to pay back. And that is very, very, very expensive. And these are our numbers, our experience. So to start with, this is roughly the kind of slope of sales that a rep goes through. And there are four very distinct phases a rep goes through. The first one is that he basically does nothing for the first few months. He's training, he's learning, he's finding his route, literally who he has to visit with what frequency. And then suddenly, he plateaus for at least one whole year. And it's a conversion of the early adopters, and he sits there. And many times, he can't leave this initial plateau. Then he plateaus after roughly 18 months again, when he really starts to show he has some first relationships. And in our case, in terms of cord blood or mesenchymal stem cell units, we're talking about roughly 20 to 25 sales per rep for a rep to pay himself. In terms of money, what we're talking about is that one rep will cost us roughly $150,000 until he pays back, which means if I have to go into a territory with 20 reps, it's $3 million. So I'm talking about rep money itself, no marketing material, nothing. And when you're talking a very broad, diverse distribution, it costs a ton of money. It's really very expensive. When you look at what we have accomplished, again, it's been through a lot of work. This is what we have done in the last few years in terms of visit. Back in 2006, we had to fire everyone. We wanted to make sure we would survive, and we had to start from scratch. I was the rep. I learned how to wait for 3 hours for an OBGYN and greet him with a smile for 30 seconds. And thanks to my laptop, I didn't kill myself. But I mean, I had to learn what the life of a rep really is. That's where the decision is actually made, and it's relevant to us. And if you look at a very important metrics, and referring back to my business background, it's what you would call an internet unique visitors. We would call unique doctors, different doctors. We are able to visit, these days, roughly 4,000 doctors out of roughly 20,000 target doctors of roughly 100,000 potential doctors in our country. So it's a humongous distribution challenge we have. And in rough numbers, 20,000 hits a year translate to a quarter of that will call us interested, and a quarter of who calls us will convert as clients. So if you want to build a growth model, hire reps and invest. And the difficult thing is, as you go down the food chain, less of quality visits will be required and more of broad distribution will be required. And thankfully enough, on a unit basis, reps will tend to cost less, but you'll need more and more reps. The other thing is to wrap up on the cord blood distribution, and as a lesson going forward is that never confuse, and that we learned a lot, that complex is not complicated. It's exactly the opposite. What we have to do is deliver simplicity. This is the natural distribution platform for a biobanking opportunity. And it's funny because, again, it's accidental. We intended to build a cord blood bank, which we did. It's very well respected in Brazil, but we ended up with a beautiful distribution system, and 4 years ago we wanted to do, what else can we do with it? And this is a little bit what I'll talk from now on. Before we step into the biobanking thing, again, I'd like to recap on why people would bank mesenchymal stem cell, for example. And the argument that MSC is a totally non-immunogenic cell, readily available via fat, via many other tissues. And the question is trying to understand parent and patient dynamics, how they make decisions. So parents and patients aren't doctors, and doctors, this is how they think. The consult, the diagnosis, there is an indication, and there is an applied therapy. So there is a straight relationship between from sick to healthy. That's what doctors are trained to do. Parents are completely different. The birth, diagnosis, nothing. Indication, a happy child. Therapy, there's no therapy. I just want to provide an umbrella of health for my family, and that's how parents think, from healthy to always healthy. Not necessarily possible, but this is how parents think, not how doctors think. And these aren't two similar ways of thinking. And the key here is that when you talk about private banking, what is it worth, or is it worthwhile or not? We have other decisions affecting families. And for example, I have a 1-year-old child at home who tested positive for a cystic fibrosis immune-responsive trypsin test. I mean, it's a 75–80% false positive test. It really didn't matter. My whole family was navigating in sites of families with cystic fibrosis. I mean, the way we deal with the prognosis of an illness as families is fairly different than simply a percentage. And it relates to the question, what is the difference between low likelihood to zero likelihood? So this is a very, very relevant question. So when doctors go ahead and make indications such as bank or don't bank, I think that's not the right way to go. I mean, what I'd expect from doctors is give me the percentage, give me the scientific publication that supports this, and I'll make the decision, the informed decision based on the likelihood of usage of this. And as an example, for example, what is the risk of a 35-year-old mother have a baby with Down syndrome? It's quite similar for an allo bone marrow transplant from 0 to 70 years. So what difference does it make, a prenatal screening test or a private cord blood banking decision? I mean, it's information and cost at the end of the day. Okay, so that's what I try to drive with this slide. And making like a little joke for doctors, that may be a matter of that, but for parents, it's definitely not playing the odds at all. Okay, I had this slide last year, and I always want to hammer this message down. And here, it's a little bit of a complicated slide, but it's very interesting. It's trying to put in a typical marketing matrix, the banking models of hematopoietic and mesenchymal stem cell, and the selling challenge we have. Okay. So on the lower axis is how ready is the product, the scientific development stage of it, and how likelihood this illness is. Okay? So if you look at where a bone marrow transplant is, it is very developed and quite unlikely. And the size of the ball is my intent to give the epidemiologic relevance of it. So what we're talking about is something that is not that unlikely, but it's 1 to 2017, according to a publication that I'll mention in a minute. But it's scientifically proven. When you compare it with, for example, the key areas of research for MSC, you're talking about figures that are like in the hundreds, the thousands in terms of epidemiologic relevance in relation to this, but that are not necessarily there yet. They're not ready. And if you look at this question, what is the likelihood of something like this actually being used by anyone? It's unknown. That's the right answer for today. You could say that the Canada and the New Zealand approvals of Osiris is a big step forward and many things, but you can't say it's ready yet. But when you explain this to doctors, when you explain this to parents, and you talk about the 250, 280 clinical trials you're able to research over the internet, this is very, very relevant information. So it's a question mark right after it's a 1-to-1 likelihood. The fact that 70% of the population over 60 years old have arthritis, for example, or the acute myocardial infarction. These are very relevant numbers. And if you look at GVHD, which is further down the line in progress, it's not that big in terms of epidemiologic relevance. So this is a marketing approach looking at the service of banking. And if you look at how to sell, it's different. We will sell, obviously not being sensational, malignancy and efficacy when you're talking about cord blood banking. But when you're talking about MSC banking, relevance and breadth, I mean, it's very, very widespread. I mean, you cover a huge host of potential diseases, of very relevant diseases. So this is the way we have looked at how to sell both things, and we had to put it to test because 7 months ago, we launched an MSC service, and it was a shot in the dark. We had no clue what kind of adoption we would get. And the opportunity, the biobanking opportunity, I would say first, again, doctors think like doctors, and if all your problems look like nails, I mean, all your solutions will be hammers. And I've gone to many of these congresses, and it's very common that you see a direct correlation of people perceiving complicated things as good business things. A relationship between both things, and in reality, you could create value and eventually deliver it, getting to this point. But there are some really important business questions that have not been eventually asked up front. And the key questions, I think, have to do with business model, potential, and the ability of having proper management to take this forward. And as my friend has told you, was telling you guys, I mean, execution is so incredibly difficult and so incredibly important. So I think the first thing is to look critically when you look at the business models of banking and cellular therapy, if they're really good businesses or a good science project. And when a company like ours sees the biobanking opportunity, the first thing we have to look is this scientifically sound? Is it technically ready? Is it good for our customers? Our reputation is absolutely negotiable. So it's obvious that we will not engage in something that's unproven or something that could jeopardize our credibility. For us, we have very limited access to innovation. So we have been engaging with partners outside of Brazil for tech transfer agreements. And it's a very nice way to access technology. In terms of operational challenges, I'd say being very careful that what you're engaging into does not transform you into a cell factory. That processing and manufacturing are completely different things. Bioreactors, and I've seen Lonza presentations. I mean, it's a completely different ballgame. You have to be very careful with that too. Now, the increased operating complexity that you have, the SOPs, and you're a step forward. It makes things a lot more difficult. And the other thing is that the more you generate cash, the more cash goes after you. It's how the world works, so you have to self-fund yourself, and then capital will come. And it's incremental capital needs all the time. And I'd say from a regulatory standpoint, try to stay away from everything that's complicated. For example, our MSC service does not require cell expansion, for example. And one of the key things is that we kind of had the tail wag the dog in the sense that cell culturing was a huge regulatory problem for us in terms of laboratory specification. Okay? And when looking at biobanking is the risk of changing your business model. Be very careful as well. Cord blood banks have a really good business model of recurring revenue and reduced financial risk. Okay, I got a 5-minute mark here. Okay. I think scalability is the key thing in our industry. So we have to make sure that the fact that you know how to collect, process, and bank cord blood may qualify you to do with different cells, but that does not necessarily equate to economic scalability or even business model scalability. So from a business standpoint, and I'll differ a bit from Greg's presentation and from Jonah's presentation, our approach to it is it's okay not to be in cellular therapy. The banking business can be a really good business, and I'll prove to you guys in a minute at least the Brazil piece. This is somewhat the supply chain, the selling piece, all the way into processing and therapy, and this is where we were until a year ago with typical private cord blood bank and away from cell expansion and bone marrow transplant. This is where we went to. Cord blood mesenchymal stem cell, the cord tissue mesenchymal stem cell, and the only breakage of scale was we had to do a brand new lab. When you look at different tissues, such as, for example, fat-derived or eventually dental pulp or any kind, we have to be very careful because a few of these boxes here may break the scale imperative, okay? This is something that's a really good business, and I'll prove you why, okay? First of all, and this is something that I thought of Greg a lot, private banking is cost competitive for consumers, and I'll tell you why. If you put in a 80-year stream of payments and discount it to present value, 40 years or 18 years, this is the lifetime value of a service, which means that how much does it cost for someone to make the decision to privately bank a tissue? $4,000 and $5,000 for MSC and cord blood, at least in our country. So this is what the allogeneic model will be competing against, and it's going down, which means it's not that expensive for a lifetime protection, especially when you're talking about a one-to-one likelihood of using an MSC going forward. It's scalable, it's not capital intensive, it's recurring revenue model, and the big con, it's a low entry barrier business, and you have to grow as fast as you can, and growing at 20–25%. What is the size? And I'll go real quick here. Brazil has roughly 3 million births. 162 of them are low Southern Europe income level, okay? And we have the potential of going all the way up here as people move up the income ladder. If you look at the MSC opportunity, you duplicate this immediately. It's the same product through the same business channel. If you put placental products, for example, you triple it, okay? If you're talking about, for example, fat, these are plastic surgeries in Brazil. Oops, sorry. You're talking about 500,000 procedures, classes A and B. Again, Europe standard income level, 3 times larger. If you look at dental pulp, it's nuts. It's like 14 times larger. So, I mean, there's many opportunities out there for the biobanking. And other biobanking opportunities such as the hybrid public-private opportunity. In Brazil, it's, we would have to go through this major regulatory hurdle. There's a Portuguese error here. Germ cells, basically oocyte, sperm, and embryo. And outsourcing opportunities in general, managing public banks and tissue banks and IPS lines of all sorts. So a wrap-up would be, many cord blood banks all around the world built a very valuable network. I think it's a great opportunity. I'd say the second thing is we need to help doctors go through this preventive medicine shift in paradigm. Be very careful in terms of business model implications. Don't ruin your business just because you want to sophisticate your business. And I think the last thing is we, as private banks, not only of cord blood stem cells, but multi-cells, we have a great business proposition for families, and I think we have to go for it, frankly. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. We're a little bit behind schedule. We got to go to speed networking. Before they do that, I have one quick question. You're only 7 months into MSC banking. What's your uptake been?
We have had 25 to 30% conversion rate of families that have banked cord blood, have banked MSCs as well. Very price insensitive at this point. It's very early in the curve. And incredible doctor response. I mean, a lot easier to sell than cord blood. Yep. A lot easier, a lot easier. Frankly, we expect to go all the way to 50%.
That's consistent with what I've heard elsewhere.
Please. After that, what I've seen in the UK, we've got
Please hold on your question.
10%?
98% conversion.
We've also got presence in 13 countries, and the average cost of board is 75%.
So the answer for all of you in the private banking business, if you're looking for the next tissue source to be banking, if you want to migrate from cord blood banking to biobanking, look at MSCs. This is the lesson that you're hearing here.
Same reps, same distribution system, roll out 90 days. In 90 days, we cover 4,000 doctors. It's like that.
Right. Okay, more questions you can ask at the break. Now we're going to go to speed networking.